For the invitation. Dear Lord, we wish to thank you for giving us the opportunity to be able to gather here this evening to discuss the business of our town. We would ask that you be with us, guide us, and direct us as we attempt to do your will and to do those things which are in the best interests of the citizens of this town. These things we ask in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, as with each meeting, we begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll ask the patriotic Mr. Hilton to lead us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, I would entertain a motion that we approve the agenda as presented. Motion second. Second. Any discussion? Not all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, like sign. It is adopted as presented. And I'll turn it over to Sean for the proposed fiscal year 2023-24 budget workshop presentation. We don't vote on anything tonight on this, but it's you take a look at it, and we're going to try to set it up for our June meeting to act on. Yes, that's what we normally do. We don't have to adopt it until prior to July 1, but if we don't adopt it at the June meeting, we have to do a special meeting. So here we are. Sean, take her away.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. And I hope everybody's doing well tonight. It's certainly good to see you on a different occasion than normal. I had this adjourned meeting tonight. And I guess I'll start by just kind of laying out where this presentation is going to go. We'll talk about the revenues over expenditures. We'll talk about our enterprise accounts. And we'll talk about some expectations. I'm certainly open to questions throughout this presentation. If you have one, feel free to stop me. Feel free to ask at any time. I would just start off by stating that there's a couple of things happening this year that are a little bit different than years past, and we'll talk about each one in turn. I also want to let you know that your budget books will be presented to you or delivered to you this Friday afternoon. Those books will include all the normal data that you're accustomed to seeing, that being capital reserves, that being graphs, that being all the different information broken down into categories with the tabs, etc. So that'll give you roughly 2.5 weeks to review this prior to staff asking for an adoption of this budget in our June meeting. Also, so you're aware, we have advertised a public hearing for our June 13th meeting that will go over, or I should say before the adoption of this budget, to receive public comment. Staff does intend to publish our budget on our website for that public comment and public review period. And the budget will be, or the proposed budget, I should say, will be available in the clerk's office for the public to come and view in person. Having said that, we'll start with our revenues. That's the first page there in your budget worksheet book, we'll call it. And you'll notice a couple of things here. I'll draw your attention to our ad valorem taxes. We are receiving, or last year, our collection rate was 97%, 97.1%. So staff is continuing to do an excellent job with our collection of our ad valorem taxes, which of course is our major funding source on the revenue side for our general fund. This year, we have budgeted 96.5% of that collection rate. That gives us about a 0.5% to cushion, just in case there's any kind of abnormalities. That's generally our practice. That does give us $773,449 in ad valorem taxes budgeted for this year. If you move down the page some, you'll notice that we have budgeted a 4% interest rate on our accounts, where that being primarily North Carolina Capital Management. We have finally started to receive a good source of interest there. In years past, the interest on our investments was a pretty substantial part of our budget as well for revenues. And during COVID, that was almost non-existent in terms of rates being at or near 0%. So throughout this year, we have increased. In fact, We have, we're getting roughly 5% right now on our accounts, just for your knowledge. We budgeted 4%. The goal is always to budget, just as a reminder, to budget our revenues conservatively and our expenditures liberally. That does give us our balanced budget in the end. And rolling through those revenues, you'll see at the bottom, they total out at the bottom of the second page there, number 2 of 21, down at the bottom, those revenues do total out to be $2,428,279. Turning over to page 3, you'll see that we have our public officials expenditures. We're going to start to get into the expenditure category now, leaving the revenues. The expenditures for public officials have by and large stayed the same year over year. They include things like the mayor's letter, the election year costs are included in this year. This is an election year. We do have an insurance increase. Property liability insurance went up about 14% this year. You'll see that spread out in the different departments. And that does total our public officials expenditures to $49,032. Turning the page, you will see our administration expenditures. And for our administration department this year, mostly what we're doing has stayed the same. Last year, we did have a couple of major projects, primarily upgrading our finance system. With our finance system upgrade, that did include several software and hardware upgrades to our computer system, our network, if you will. So this year, we don't have too many new upgrades planned. We are planning to upgrade our phone systems to bring those current this year, but that's really our major upgrade expense. We do also have in here a 2.5% COLA, or cost of living, for our employees, and up to a 2.5% merit bonus for our employees. And that does bring our expenditures for administration to $665,041. On page 6, you'll notice our CMRA expenditures. This is our post office. Again, these expenditures pretty much stay the same. In fact, there was a decrease in expenditures from last year, but a very small one, primarily doing the same thing. And that's essentially just passing on expenses to the customer and breaking even there with our CMRA. On our zoning, you'll also notice that these expenditures stay the same, roughly $6,061 in zoning. We do not have a zoning position. In future years, it is staff's vision to bring in a planning position. You'll see some of that in our comprehensive land use plan. That will be on the June agenda for adoption, and we'll talk about that more then. But for this year's budget, there is not a position in zoning at this time. You'll see on page 8, our general fund contingency remains the same. It's $5,000. Moving into our police department, that is page 9. We have a increase in this department, primarily because this year we do have we have added a police officer position, a full-time police officer position in our budget. We have also added a police vehicle for that officer in our budget. So that does total $842,619. Moving into fire department on page 10, this primarily stayed the same as well, year-over-year expenses. We do have in this year's budget the OSFM grant, the Office of the State Fire Marshal grant. We did find out on Monday that we received that. So you'll see the budget. It's a 50% grant. I think Chief is planning to purchase some air packs and some spare bottles with that. So that there is an increase there. We did not receive that grant last year, but we did receive it this year. So congratulations to Chief on receiving that grant. That expenditure for that department does total $369,308. Again, on this department, it's important to point out that it is imperative that we start thinking long-term. Long-term for this department would be the addition of paid firefighter staff. This is something that is reasonable to expect in the next 5 years or so. We will probably as a town pursue what's known as the SAFER grant to achieve this. But at the end of the SAFER grant period, that's 3 years, the town will then be liable or on the hook, so to speak, for the salaries and benefits and all the costs associated with those firefighters. So I say this just to say that there is a path forward to obtaining this goal, to phasing it into our budget. But in talking through a budget retreat, it is important to mention some future goals as well as, of course, mentioning the proposed budget for this year. So there's no paid staff in this year's budget. Just wanted to bring it to your attention that it is reasonable to expect that moving forward in future budgets. On page 12, you'll notice our street department expenditures, and these expenditures as well have pretty much stayed consistent year to year. And I know I'm starting to sound a little bit like a broken record, but I will sum this up and you will understand a little bit more why our budget is as similar as it has been to years past in budgets. We did do a little bit of maneuvering with our ARPA grant this year, and there are some different items that are going to be requested on that ARPA grant that do affect the street department specifically. That's why I'm bringing it up now. But you'll notice on our street department there that we have not added any new employees in streets, that there is some additional cost requested by our public works director, mostly rock and material to repair and be ready to address concerns around the lake as it relates to our streets. That total for that department is $56,090. On our POW bill, again, this is something that we have been setting money aside for. You'll see our revenues for POW bill are estimated at $25,823. We do anticipate to purchase some rocks, cold patches, other materials that we can keep in stock to be able to respond in a very timely manner should we receive complaints or need to address areas around the lake. But we are beginning to look at things in POW bill where we can utilize both new equipment. If you recall, we did purchase a tractor to help us maintain our road system this year out of POW bill, but we're also looking to do things that would give us, for example, a capital predictor model that allows us to see the conditions of our roads. It also allows us to plan long-term to tie our roads into our utility lines so that we're not digging up utility lines and repaving roads out of order. And by that, I mean, we do things that make sense. We replace the utility lines when we replace the roads and so forth. So again, just mentioning some future ideas here, but for this year, you'll see that our expenditures are totaled at $25,823 to offset the revenues that we are estimated to receive from the state based on the miles that we submit on our POW bill survey. Sanitation this year, we do have a substantial challenge ahead of us in sanitation. It is a contract year for waste management. We do have the option to take this to bid. You will hear more about this in the coming days, but for now we have budgeted using projected rates. And we do this because our sanitation rates are essentially a pass-through. It does not affect the budget long-term. We simply passed our cost along to the customer. So we feel comfortable using our projected rate model for this. And then as we talk about and discuss the waste management contract and whether or not we want to go out to bid for that, or whether or not we want to negotiate on the proposal they've given us, then we can update these numbers in turn. But that's I wanted to specifically state that because you do see a rather large jump. It's about a $60,000 jump as it's listed currently. It was $261,183 last year, $261,183 last year. And this year is projected to be $312,477. And we'll come back to that when we discuss our enterprise accounts and we talk about the total water bill, so to speak. On the mosquito control expenditures there on page 15, you'll see that there is about a 50% increase there, a 40% increase to be more exact. And that's simply geared at accounting for the rising cost of chemicals and increasing the spraying around the lake to really do a better job of being proactive in that category. Now that we have the appropriate licensures and we have the appropriate means to conduct that within our department. On page 16, this is our aquatic control expenditures. We do have essentially the same expenditures that are coming forward from last year. We've done this really in a way to set ourselves up for future success. And by that, I mean, we of course do have our contract services that are carrying over from year to year. Those are things like Limno Sciences, the various labs that we use, the contract we have with North Carolina State University for sampling, shipping cost, different website costs to keep our White Lake NC website going. I believe it's Lake Watch specifically. But I say we've set ourselves up for the future because we are making a contribution to our capital reserve aquatic control for $25,766. And what this does is, as we continue to work through with the state, as we continue to look at the list that will ultimately be provided by the state in either our second opinion or our replacement options for our scientific consultant, we have some margin to work within there. While we're talking about aquatic controls, I do want to point out our capital reserves in that category. We do, as you recall, in 2018, we did start to set aside funds to replenish our aquatic control capabilities. This was done as an effort to build up a reserve in the event that another treatment or some sort of management plan was needed. Currently, we have $301,674 in our lake management capital reserve fund specifically. There's a $25,766 proposal that we just discussed coming from this year's budget, or the proposed this year's budget. And then there's another $119,537 in our wastewater contributions to the lake management fund, which brings us to a total of $446,977 in lake management funds. I emphasize this to say we're in a great position. I think from a professional standpoint, we are adequately prepared to go a number of different directions. I think we could even look at things like funding stormwater projects, minor stormwater projects. We can certainly look at lake management plans and proposals as they become available, and we can continue working on our lake management preliminary plan that was provided by Lumber Council of Governments through our action items. But as we get more information from the state, as we continue our meetings with the state, I do want to bring that number to your attention because we are in a position where we can move forward on items as they make sense to do so, or as proposals do become available to present to council. So that is the end of our general fund expenditures. You'll notice that the total sum is $2,428,279. That does balance out with revenues over expenditures, leaving us with a balanced budget for our general fund. Before we move on to our enterprise accounts, are there any questions from the council in relation to general fund expenditures or revenues? Hearing none, we'll move on to our wastewater and water funds. We do have these set up as enterprise funds. As a reminder to council, our enterprise funds are designed to be self-sustaining. They're designed to benefit our utilities, and they're designed to increase the quality of service that we can provide to our citizens and our customer base. Having said that, we'll start with our water. There is no proposed rate change for water this year. What that does is allow us to set aside, well, first of all, it allows us to cover our expenditures, but it also allows us to continue setting monies aside in our capital reserve accounts so that we are prepared to begin to work on our water system. We have no major water projects that we're currently doing. If you recall, we've just finished phase 2 of our sewer sanitary improvement project. We are currently, we've got no water projects, capital water projects ongoing. We are, in fact, we just were awarded several months ago a $250,000 water AIA grant. That stands for Asset and Inventory Assessment. As we work through that grant, I would plan as a council to receive project ideas and proposals from staff to begin working on our water system. At last measure, water and wastewater collectively were, I believe, 53% in the state of repair. Is a category that the environmental finance system uses there. And all that essentially means is that we are about 20% over the threshold. And with these capital reserve projects, we continue to bring that number down, which is an indicator of a healthy system overall. But I do want to point out that we do have a balanced budget in water for our enterprise account with no rate change at $922,365, balancing with revenues and expenditures. And again, that does allow us to put money in our capital reserves. Moving over to capital reserves on the water, we have between the 7 different categories, we have roughly $1,071,449 there in our water capital reserve accounts, with about half of that in our water system improvement project capital reserve. So again, be thinking about and be on the lookout for as we work on this water AIA project. Of course, staff will continue to pursue grants, but we may want to invest in ourselves some on the water side. We have been preparing to do so with our rate structure. If you turn the page to 20, that brings us into our wastewater. This is where we have to have a discussion. And the discussion starts and ends, quite frankly, with some of the rate analysis we've received in the past. And there's really no way to sugarcoat it. It's just not been very good rate analysis. This year, staff has worked with Environmental Finances Center out of the School of Government, and we have identified that our wastewater rates are not sustainable where they are currently. And they're largely not sustainable where they are currently because of the debt service on the account. The debt service, of course, is our 2 phases of our capital improvement project for our sewer sanitary improvements. And I would argue that any healthy enterprise account should have a substantial amount of debt service on it as a way of investing back in yourself, because of course, these systems fail. And if you're not upgrading and improving your service, you are in turn setting yourself up for failure and repeat expenditures. So in the long run, we're saving money. In the short term, we're spending money. I say that to say staff is proposing a 13% increase on the base rate in wastewater and an 11% increase on the tier rate in wastewater. And what that amounts to be on the base rate, that is an increase of $2.87 in wastewater. And then incremental, it goes up about $1 per tier for wastewater only. So with the new wastewater rates, if adopted as presented, the water bill would go, I say water bill, that includes, of course, sanitation, that includes recycling, that includes lake management fee, that includes water fee. The new minimum rate would be $60.07, whereas currently I believe it's around $57, $55 in that range. With this rate increase of 13% on the base and 11% on the tiers, that would allow us to, number one, cover our debt service, and number two, put in a small contribution to our capital reserves for our wastewater system so that we are adequately prepared to fix and address issues as they occur. Again, our system is about 53% in a state of repair. So we have built the rate structure proposal, taking that into account. On our capital reserves for wastewater, we are currently the current total is $1,368,613. And I know that sounds like a lot of money in capital reserve, but over $700,000 of that accounts for our sewer payments in the event that we have a tough year. We have money set aside to make those payments so that we can get through the year and readdress moving into that next fiscal year. So it's not near as much money as it seems, and there are things set aside for new trucks, new lagoon, or lagoon repairs, excuse me, a new bar screen, lake water contributions, et cetera. So from staff's recommendation, it is vitally important that we address wastewater this year. Again, water is in a healthy state. It is a very sustainable state, but wastewater itself does need some attention. Before we move on to the ARPA funds in our presentation, are there any questions on our enterprise accounts? Hearing none, I'll briefly discuss our ARPA plans this year. And to start with that, it's important that staff understands we are going to be utilizing, based on several recommendations, the School of Government recommendation primarily, to a model called salary replacement. And what that does is allow us essentially as a town to claim the standard deduction set forth by the federal government. That standard deduction is a $10 million loss. So we're claiming a $10 million loss, and that allows us to replace salaries during COVID and free up that money for general government expenditures. It does not allow us to put that money into fund balance, but allows us to make purchases in a one-time nature. So staff is recommending with our ARPA funds, they for your benefit, they total $245,078.33. Staff is recommending that we purchase a vehicle lift to improve our maintenance capabilities and our general upkeep capabilities of our vehicle fleet. We can do a lot more items in-house, thus in turn saving money by not having to utilize various vendors around the county for basic maintenance, oil change, tire rotations, blade replacements on lawnmowers, et cetera. Staff is also recommending that we replace our generator. We've had our generator outside there to the left since 2001. So it's a 22-year-old machine. We do rely on that. It's critically important in the event of a power failure or a natural disaster. So we will be replacing that in this proposal. We'll be purchasing in conjunction with the county fire tax district. We'll be providing 50% of a new first responder vehicle. That would be a F-350 with an 8-foot bed that does have compartments set aside on the exterior of the truck to be able to respond for our first responders to respond adequately to the calls they receive. It's my understanding half would be life-saving equipment, half would be first aid in terms of how they outfit that truck. But again, we would be splitting that cost 50% with the county through the county fire district tax. There would be a side-by-side purchase that would allow us to do things like mosquito spray down narrow roads and utilize this in public works to respond to minor things. That would also allow us to pull some of our smaller trailers and natural disasters and not have to utilize trucks for everything that we do. Staff is also recommending the proposal of a used street sweeper. We've located one that we've got a good report on. We're going to continue to do our homework on that. Kevin and I will be meeting with the company on Thursday of this week to see this in action, but we think we've got a good lead on something that would be beneficial to us at a very discounted rate from a neighboring municipality. So it's coming from this region. It's not coming from another state. And then also staff is recommending that we purchase a site study and plan. And what this plan is intended to do is essentially review our campus, review our organization, review our needs, and set ourselves up for the future, look at the vision, look at the long-term planning, but specifically, this site study is the first step in pursuing a grant to replace our fire department and replace our police department. And by replace, I mean either move or add on to or make any modifications to those buildings. Again, it's reasonable to expect a paid fire staff. We do need things like living quarters, sleeping quarters, more storage. It's reasonable to expect various expanding police needs as we continue, as society continues to evolve. So this site study is the first step in pursuing those grants and pursuing various appropriations to justify need and inform the council of staff's vision and staff's future ideas. Are there any questions on the American Rescue Plan proposal?
I just got a couple, I wonder if I can go back.
Yes, sir.
So quick things. First on the police department. Times are changing, you know, I used to be pretty tough on the time management. The size of our population, but like you hit on, where things are changing, people are undocumented, no fingerprints, no DNA. I'm proud of our police department. I'm glad their families will share them to protect me, my wife, and family, and my businesses. And I'm glad to hear we've gotten the budget to hire another officer. With that being said, I would like to look at their current salary. I know you're going across the board raises for 2 and 2.5%. But in this environment, I know it's very competitive. I talked to a retired officer the other day, and he was talking about respect. I think we don't show our officers enough respect. I would like to visit their salaries, if that can be increased anyway. So we can, like I said, their family sharing them to protect us. And my other thing was on our maintenance department. I remember there was some discussion, and I don't know if we added anybody to that department. I don't know if we're fully staffed the way we were in the past. I didn't know if there was any addition of personnel into that. So if you can enlighten me, I mean, maybe
Yes,
we're
sir.
back full. I know we're talking about maybe when Kevin got on, look at hiring someone else. But
Yes,
I
sir.
felt we're deficient in that department as far as a hurricane or some kind of storms or some kind of riot.
Yes, sir. And I'll start with the police department salaries. You may recall, last year we did adjust those. We can certainly look at adjusting those again. We brought those up, in response to, making them more competitive with our area, but certainly I can have a conversation with chief and lieutenant about, continuing to evaluate that process. And if we need to look further into that, we're more than willing to do that. On the public works staff, I would just say thank you for reminding me, because we did add a public works staff position in this budget. So that would bring us to 7 staff members, and we are currently full staff with 6. But there is one addition, there is one additional employee added in this budget.
And no tax increase.
No tax increase, no, sir.
We're having a good night.
We need the fire truck, we need the bill, we need this, we're about to raise taxes.
Let's talk about that another day.
Long-term planning. Any more questions from council?
You've done a really good job putting this together. I've been, working with you, and it is a really good thing that we're talking about no tax increase. And we're talking about adding an additional police position. We've added someone in public works. We've increased our salaries to make them more competitive. We're getting in good shape in our capital reserve accounts. I know y'all have done a lot of work on this, and I know ARPA helps out some, and understand that. But most of this has been due to you and Amber and staff working on this, and I've addressed questions most days when I walked in, and so I know how diligently y'all have been working on this to see what you can come up with, and it's a good proposal and a good use of the taxpayers' money.
Thank you, sir. I think this is
And
my,
I applaud y'all for the work you've done on it. I know how hard you've been working on it, and this has primarily been y'all's work. I've, certainly discussed it with you, but y'all are the ones that have laid it out, and good job.
yes, sir. Thank you. I think this is my obligatory obligation to turn around and say thank you personally to Amber, because without her, a lot of this work is not possible. And to also our department heads and our different departments, because the requests they make are very reasonable. We're not having to do a whole lot of justification on that, and their day-to-day operations and their good stewardship of money does help our planning and our budgetary process tremendously. So I want to say thank you to my staff as well. But I do appreciate your comments, sir. Having said that, that would conclude staff's presentation of the budget proposal. We do plan to make this available to the public, as we discussed in our opening comments. And we will plan to move forward with a public hearing at our June meeting.
let me, thank you, Sean, let me add to that. As Sean said, they'll be sending out the budget booklets, by probably.
End of the week, yes,
by
sir.
the End of the week, by Friday. So take a look at this. We'll have our public hearing in June. And again, normally what we have done is an adoption of the budget at that time. And just keep in mind when you get that and you take a look at it, if you have something that strikes you or you need to find out about, and that's not unusual to have something like that come up. But be sure, if you would, and contact Sean before we get to the June meeting, because it's so helpful to him and Amber's shaking her head, and I understand. It's when you work with a budget like this, sometimes it's kind of like Rubik's Cube. I mean, it's fairly simple in concept, but you can't increase an expenditure without increasing revenue. That's what makes it a budget. So, you know, it's when you want to add something, when you take away something, you've got to make more than one adjustment in the budget. You've got to do it on both sides in order to have the budget balance, which is what we do when we, you know, the amount of our income is the same amount as the amount of our expenditures. And that's again, what a balanced budget is. So again, great job on this. And if y'all have anything come when you get your budget booklets in, if you're probably like me tonight, you know, when I look at this, see what y'all have done and the budget is balanced, that's just a good thing.
Yes, sir.
And I know the folks here at the lake will appreciate it. All right, at this point, I'm not aware or hadn't been made aware of any other business. I don't know of anything we have from the previous meeting. So at this point, we're at the open forum. It's 3 minutes per citizen to address the board. Does anyone wish to address the board at this time? If not, we appreciate y'all being here tonight and being here with us. And at this time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion second. Any discussion? Not all in favor, indicate by saying aye. Any opposed, like sign. Thanks again.
So you guys, your vote yesterday.
Yeah, all right, that's the second time I wrote in.